Why most people surrender their power without realizing it. Nobody steals most people's power. That's the disturbing part. They give it away themselves, not in one dramatic moment, not through force, but through hundreds of small decisions they barely notice. Every time they let fear make a choice for them, every time they suppress an opinion to avoid disapproval, every time they allow someone else's expectations to determine their direction, a piece of their power leaves with it. Years later, many people find themselves living lives they never consciously chose, working toward goals they didn't create, following rules they never questioned, defending beliefs they never examined. The question isn't who took their power. The question is, when did they hand it over? And why didn't they notice it happening? Power rarely disappears overnight. It leaves gradually, so gradually, in fact, that most people never notice it happening. They imagine power is something dramatic, political influence, the wealth, authority, control over others. But the most important form of power is much simpler. It is the ability to direct your own thoughts, decisions, and actions, the ability to determine the course of your own life. And this is precisely the form of power many people surrender without realizing it. The process usually begins with a natural human desire, the desire to belong. Human beings evolved in tribes. For thousands of years, acceptance increased the chances of survival. Rejection carried serious consequences. As a result, the human brain became highly sensitive to social approval. Even today, people fear exclusion far more than they admit, and that fear quietly shapes behavior. A person wants to express an opinion, but remains silent because it might create disagreement. A person wants to pursue a goal, but abandons it because others may not approve. A person knows a decision is wrong, but follows the crowd because standing alone feels uncomfortable. Each individual moment appears insignificant, yet together they create a pattern of outsourcing decisions, outsourcing judgment, outsourcing identity. Little by little, external approval begins replacing internal conviction. This is how power leaves. Not through force, through dependence. The dependence becomes so common that many people mistake it for normal behavior. They constantly seek reassurance before making choices, seek permission before taking action, seek validation before trusting their own judgment. At first glance, this seems harmless, even responsible. But over time it creates a dangerous habit, the habit of allowing other people to determine what is true, valuable, acceptable, or possible. And once that habit becomes established, genuine independence becomes difficult because independent thinking carries risk. It creates uncertainty, conflict, responsibility. If you make your own decisions, you must also accept the consequences. Many people unconsciously avoid this burden. Instead, they follow established paths, accepted opinions, popular narratives, social expectations, not necessarily because they believe them, but because conformity feels safer than uncertainty. This is one reason institutions, organizations, and social systems often gain influence so easily. Most people are not controlled through force. They are controlled through convenience. It is easier to follow than to question, easier to comply than to analyze, easier to repeat than to think. The human mind naturally seeks efficiency, and questioning everything requires energy, attention, effort. As a result, many people gradually surrender authority over their own thinking. They allow others to define success, others to define failure, others to define what matters. Eventually, they stop asking a critical question, "Do I actually believe this?" Instead, they ask, "Will this be accepted?" The difference is enormous. One question seeks truth, the other seeks approval. And approval has a strange effect on people. The more dependent someone becomes on it, the easier they become to influence, because anyone capable of controlling approval can begin controlling behavior. This dynamic appears everywhere, in workplaces, relationships, social groups, politics, media. People alter their actions to gain acceptance or avoid criticism. Without realizing it, they are exchanging autonomy for comfort, power for certainty, freedom for belonging. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of this process is that it feels completely reasonable while it is happening. Nobody wakes up and decides to surrender their independence. Nobody consciously chooses to become dependent on outside validation. The shift happens gradually, one compromise at a time, one avoided conflict at a time, one unchallenged assumption at a time, until eventually something remarkable occurs. A person begins living according to expectations they never consciously chose. And at that point, the real question is no longer how power was surrendered. The real question is who benefits when people stop thinking for themselves. The answer is surprisingly simple. Anyone who can influence your decisions without resistance benefits when you stop thinking for yourself. This does not require a conspiracy. It does not require secret meetings, hidden organizations, or elaborate schemes. It only requires human nature, because whenever people become dependent on external guidance, they become easier to direct. The less confidence someone has in their own judgment, the more likely they are to adopt the judgment of others. This is why influence rarely begins with controlling actions. It begins with controlling perception. If someone can shape how you interpret reality, they often gain influence over the choices that follow. Think about it. Every major decision in your life is based on perception. What you believe is possible, what you believe is risky, what you believe is valuable, what you believe is normal. Chant those perceptions, and behavior often changes automatically. This is why the surrender of power usually happens long before people realize it. The loss is not external first. It is internal. A person gradually stops trusting their own observations, stops trusting their instincts, stops questioning assumptions, stops examining ideas critically. And once that happens, influence becomes remarkably easy, because people no longer need to be forced. They begin participating willingly. History provides countless examples of this pattern. Entire groups have accepted ideas that later appeared irrational, not because they lacked intelligence, but because social pressure, authority, and collective belief became stronger than independent thought. This is an uncomfortable reality. Intelligence alone does not protect people from influence. In many cases, intelligent individuals become exceptionally skilled at rationalizing beliefs they never properly examined. The real protection is awareness, the willingness to pause and ask difficult questions. Why do I believe this? Who benefits from this belief? Did I arrive at this conclusion myself, or did I simply inherit it from the environment around me? Few people ask these questions consistently because questioning creates discomfort, and discomfort is something most people spend their lives avoiding. But discomfort is often where power begins. The moment you question an assumption, you reclaim a small piece of authority over your own mind. The moment you challenge an expectation you never chose, you reclaim another. The moment you stop requiring universal approval before acting, another piece returns. This is why genuine power rarely looks dramatic. It does not begin with controlling others. It begins with controlling yourself, your attention, your emotions, your decisions, your beliefs. The people who appear most powerful are not always those with the most money, status, or influence. Often, they are the individuals least controlled by external pressure, the individuals capable of thinking independently, even when doing so is unpopular. The individuals willing to tolerate uncertainty, rather than blindly adopt certainty from someone else, because dependence creates vulnerability. Independence creates leverage, and leverage has always been one of the foundations of power. The irony is that many people spend years pursuing power in the external world while neglecting the place where power actually begins, the mind. If your thoughts can be dictated by fear, approval, trends, or social pressure, external success offers limited freedom. But when your thinking becomes your own, something changes. You stop reacting automatically. You stop living entirely according to expectations. You stop surrendering decisions that belong to you. And that is where real autonomy begins. Most people do not lose their power through force. They lose it through small acts of dependence repeated over time. The desire for approval, the fear of rejection, the comfort of conformity, the avoidance of responsibility. Each one seems insignificant on its own, but together they gradually transfer authority away from the individual. Real power begins when that process is reversed. When you think independently, question carefully, act deliberately, and stop allowing external validation to become the final judge of your choices. Looking back on your own life, what do you think causes people to surrender their power most often? Fear, comfort, the need for approval, or something else entirely? Share your perspective in the comments, because the first step toward reclaiming power is recognizing where it was quietly given away in the first place.